we'll start right here. This evening, this is Bible Geography 3, The Life of Christ, Lesson 4, and we're going to be starting on page 14 in our notes. And if you have your Holman Bible Atlas, be on page 218 there. And we start with John the Baptist's message and ministry. And please note on this particular map on page 218, where John the Baptist ministered, and some say he was associated with, what was that area? The caves on the north and the west side of the Dead Sea, the Qumran community. So that's the first blank letter A, that John may have been associated with the Qumran community. And
how do we spell that?
Qumran. Qumran. And that's right in our map. You could see this up here. Let me go over here. The Qumran area is here on the map, right on the north and the west side of the Dead Sea.
Oh, that makes sense.
I'm sorry?
The wilderness. It says the wilderness, like the Judean wilderness right there.
Yeah. Well, we'll get there in just a moment. But as far as we're just saying, he may have been associated with that community there. That's what the book also says on page 218. If you see under John the Baptist message and ministry. So I got that piece just right from there, that first paragraph, where at some point John may have been associated with the Qumran community, who likewise believed the Messianic era was about to dawn and practiced a form of baptism. But then John was definitely called of God to do the baptism that he did and to institute a Christian baptism. Okay, so the second thing now, and here B, C, and D are the three biblical areas where John baptized. Now, two of them may have been the same place, but they were called different things. But letter A is he preached his message along the edge of the Jordan River in where? Where does that say in John 1:28? And just to let you know, John 1:28, it says one thing, and it's other translations have a different name. I realize here, my Bible is over here. What does John 1:28 say? Where John was baptizing. Yes, that's what goes in that blank there, Bethabara. Now, if you look at your notes, this town may also have been known as, or if you look in that map on map 106, on the page that we're looking at, the city where John is baptizing here is called what? What is called? It's called Bethany. So that's be where Bethabara was, where Bethany is located on this map. Okay, so that's one of the places where John baptized, Bethabara. And this is where Jesus was baptized. So, by the way, here's the Qumran area, the caves. I showed this one other time, but it's so fascinating to see those caves and those very rugged, mountainous area. Perhaps John did have some connection, with that community. Now, this is the possible location. And again, nothing is definite as far as in the archaeology and the actual location of different sites, but they do believe they find certain things, and it could be that this is where John the Baptizer baptized Jesus in Bethabara beyond Jordan. So John 3:23, since we're in John there, where does it say that John baptized there? In another location, but he also baptized, John 3:23, where?
Anon near Salim.
Okay, in Anon near Salim. So find that location on the map. It's also there about halfway up that red line. You can see Salim and Anon, sites where John frequently baptized. So So these are areas that he baptized. And if you go to Matthew chapter 3 and verse 1, Matthew chapter 3, verse 1, I believe Matthew is referring to Bethabara in this verse, but he doesn't cite that city by name, but he says he's preaching in a certain location. So where is he preaching, Matthew 3? Okay, so there we see the wilderness of Judea. And so you see why, though. Look at the map again, where Bethany is located on the map, or Bethabara. We're saying that's the same site. And I believe clearly here, when Matthew says that John was baptizing in the wilderness of Judea, that it's the same location as Bethabara, because you see what's right across the Jordan River. There is the wilderness of Judea. And this is clearly then John preaching, and then Jesus comes to him and is baptized in the Jordan. Verse 6, he's baptized in the Jordan. So this is the same area. So those are the three places referenced in the New Testament where John baptized: in Bethabara, in Aenon near Salim, and in the wilderness of Judea in the Jordan River area. So that's letter D. So Matthew 3, 1 through 6 says he was preaching in the wilderness of Judea. That's the blank. You got that blank, right? Letter D. The wilderness of Judea, and baptizing in the Jordan. So that's a summary of John's ministry and his baptizing work. Okay, so we get now into the life of Jesus Christ. Really what my goal is with the life of Christ is follow his footsteps. Follow the footsteps of Jesus from place to place. And hopefully we'll find great blessing in this as we look at the different geographic areas referenced in God's word as we follow the life of Christ. So we kind of gave an overview of the life of Jesus. So we're going to call this again his year of inauguration. And Ellie, could you please read that first statement, the bullet point under number 4? His ministry begins there. If you could just read that.
His ministry begins with his baptism and temptation. This year is highlighted by his making initial contact with those men who will become his disciples. His first public miracles, his first visit to Jerusalem during his earthly ministry.
Okay, so that statement is trying to summarize his first year. So the key things there: his baptism, his temptation, he makes initial contacts with his disciples, his first miracles, he visits Jerusalem, and that kind of summarizes his first year. So his year of inauguration is marked with it begins with his baptism. So, of course, we just mentioned, where was Jesus baptized? Letter A, in the what river? The Jordan River. Okay, we all know that. So that's letter A, the Jordan River. Jesus was baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River. Again, that's the map there. So immediately then after he was, let me say, so where did he come from then? Before he was baptized, where was he? Where was he? Where did he move from? Yeah, from Nazareth. Okay, so find Nazareth on your map here. Okay, so this is where Jesus was baptized. So find Nazareth on your map, which is here. And he comes all the way down to just north of the Dead Sea to Bethabara. And that's probably a 70 to 80 mile journey. Now, I didn't notice this on the maps, but you can note this, and you can kind of track at least the general mileage as the crow flies. Anyway, we don't know exactly how windy the roads were, but on the maps you could see where it gives you the gauge of distance, like about 20 miles. So when you go from Nazareth and down to Bethany, I calculated that to be somewhere between 70 to 80 miles. So that was how long he traveled there to get baptized. He did it. That's a long way to go to church to get baptized, you know. And that's slow moving. I can just imagine how windy the roads were, how rough they were. I mean, when we were in Grenada, the roads, you could never go faster than I mean, rarely, I should say never, rarely could you go faster than 30 miles an hour. Because as soon as you get speed, it's like this, and it's like this, and it's like this, and it's bumpy, and there's speed bumps, and you just go slow. So even if it's a 13-mile journey, it takes you 45 minutes, that kind of thing. So can you imagine what it was like in the days of Jesus to travel that distance? It would take probably 2 days of travel at least. Okay, so he went, he was baptized, and then when he was baptized, Matthew chapter 4, what is his next movement? Matthew chapter 4, verse 1, where was he led? After his baptism? Into the wilderness to be tempted. So that's letter B, that's the word. So he went from the Jordan River into the wilderness. Now, probably not a huge distance traveled there, but again, the map references this, that the wilderness is just on the other side of the Jordan River. So he went there to be tempted. Where did he go after he was baptized? John tells us. John tells us he returned. I'm sorry, after he was tempted. Where did he go after the temptation in the wilderness? He went back to the area where he was baptized. So he went from the Jordan area, Bethabara, into the wilderness, and back from the wilderness back to where John was baptizing. So letter C, Jesus returned to where John was baptizing, and the first disciples begin to follow Jesus. That's where he meets Andrew and John, and Andrew went and told his brother Peter, and I believe John went and told his brother James, and they begin to follow Jesus. If you go back to John, now this whole section really of Jesus's first year of ministry, from this point on, it's pretty much skipped out by Matthew and Mark and Luke. And John is the one who really gives us the best detail of the first year of Christ's earthly ministry. So in John chapter 1, he was baptized, and then John sees Jesus coming to him in verse 29. And then John references the baptism of Christ. He had already been baptized, and so that's when John preached what? Behold the Lamb of God. And verse 37, 2 disciples heard him speak. Who were those 2 disciples? Verse 40, one of the 2 that heard him speak was Andrew. And the other one who heard him speak is the unnamed author, John. So John doesn't refer to himself. And then Andrew, it says, I believe when he says in verse 41, he first finds his own brother Simon. Now, I think 2 things could be in play. One, a priority of first going to tell his brother first thing. But I believe that there's another thing in play in that John went to tell his brother, James, but Andrew got to Peter first. In other words, Andrew first told Peter before John could tell James. But essentially, I believe you've got 4 of them. John does tell James, and he's, again, quiet in the passage, but that's my understanding. And it says he first findeth his own brother Simon. So here you have Jesus returning to this area then, and Andrew, John, Simon, and James begin to follow Jesus. That's why I put James in there at the bottom of page 14. Okay, so Jesus is in what area at this point? He's still in, let's see, yeah, he's down here still. This is where all this is happening in Bethabara. Now, if you follow this in John's gospel, what does it say in verse 43? Yeah, he goes back into Galilee. So he leaves this region of Bethabara and goes back into Galilee, and he specifically finds who in verse 43? Philip. And where was Philip from? It's amazing the details, right? Of Bethsaida. So Philip was from Bethsaida of Galilee. Now, so locate Bethsaida. You could go to map 107, perhaps. Map 107. And Bethsaida is on the northern shore of the Sea of Galilee. So again, that is a long journey. That would have taken a little bit to travel. So letter D now, letter D on page 15. I'm on page 15. Jesus returns to Galilee. And from Bethabara, he goes to Bethsaida. That's where Philip lived. Now, who else lived there? Verse 44. Yeah, Andrew and Peter lived there. They were fishermen in the Sea of Galilee. Now, we're going to see later that somehow Peter does move to Capernaum, but this is where they were from, Bethsaida. Now, this region is beautiful. It's a beautiful part of the world, really. You know, you have the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee, if you want to jot these little descriptions down, was a sea 8 miles wide, 12 miles long. It was a freshwater sea, a fresh body of water, 700 feet below sea level. 700 feet below sea level. So it was 8 miles by 12 miles, fresh water, 700 feet below sea level, surrounded in some parts, not in every part, but there was mountains around, so that's how the wind could come down these mountains, whip up storms very quickly. And we see that in the New Testament. And so again, what we read in the Bible, it's consistent with the geography. So this is a beautiful region of the world. And so here's a few pictures. This is Bethsaida. It's very pretty. And this is a tell in Bethsaida. Remember, a tell is where an ancient ruin was, where there could be a city, and then through time, maybe it gets destroyed by war or by fire, and then they build over it, and then they build over it, and then before you know it, you have a mound. And because they kept building cities, and now, so that's what a tell is. Anyway, this is the tell of Bethsaida from an aerial shot. And then this is a kind of close-up view of one of the ruins there in Bethsaida. Not sure what that is, just an ancient ruin of Bethsaida. Okay, so on the same map, this is a pretty good map here, as well as the map across the page on 108, because here you have the region of the Sea of Galilee, that map on 108. Although when you start talking about like Nazareth on 108, Nazareth isn't in that 108 map. Cana is not in that because that's kind of it's west of the Sea of Galilee, so it's not there. Now, two other names for the Sea of Galilee, by the way, are the Sea of Tiberias. Now, locate Tiberias on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee, about halfway down. What do we say about Tiberias? What was important about that city? That became what?
The capital.
The capital. So some called the Sea of Galilee the Sea of Tiberias. And in another place, it's called the Lake of Gennesaret. Yeah, the Lake of Gennesaret, which is a city right alongside, that's on the northern part of the Sea of Galilee, again on the west-hand side. So the Sea of Galilee is called the Sea of Tiberias, the Lake of Gennesaret, and it makes sense when you look at the map. Again, you see that these cities are around the Sea of Galilee, and especially Tiberias. That makes sense because that was the capital city of Galilee. Okay, so from Bethsaida now, Jesus is in Bethsaida, and he finds Philip there. And then Philip went and found Nathanael, and Jesus came to Nathanael. in John chapter 1, where Philip findeth Nathanael and says, we have found the Christ. And then, that's when Nathanael says, can any good thing come out of Nazareth? John chapter 1, verse 46. And then Jesus goes to Cana, because that's where Nathanael was from. Now, it doesn't say Nathanael was from Cana in here, but it says it in John chapter 21, verse 2. There you go. If you look there real quick, you'll see that Nathanael was of Cana. So Jesus now goes from Bethsaida to Cana, where Nathanael was from. And while Jesus was in Cana, that leads us right into John chapter 2, where he does what? He turns the water into wine in Cana. So that's number 2, Cana, C-A-N-A. Now, Cana, if you look at here, so Bethsaida is here, and Cana is here. So how many miles do you think that is? If you look at the map and just gauge, it's about, maybe about 20, about 15, 20 miles, somewhere in there. Have you ever walked 15 or 20 miles? You ever? Taking a donkey, 15 or 20? I mean, I think this is amazing, right? That Jesus Christ is moving. So he's moving from Bethsaida to Cana. Why? Because souls. He's gathering disciples. This is what he's come to do, to seek and to save the lost and to train men. So this is at the very early stages now, literally the first few days of his earthly ministry. So he travels about 20 miles to Cana. That's not in your notes, but I did jot down beside how many miles he's traveling. So far he went from Bethabara to Bethsaida, probably 70 to 80 miles, now another 20 miles or so. And then from Cana, that's where he turns the water into wine. And again, I looked up, there's ruins in all of these cities. So if you look on up here, you can see Cana, the city of Nathanael, and where he turned water into wine. Now, I did look, there was even a cave. There was an article in the Biblical Archaeology Review a few years ago, and they said that's where Jesus turned the water into wine. I don't have a picture of this, but in this region here, they say, there's like a cave. I didn't think the wedding was in a cave. I don't know, but I'm not an archaeologist. But anyway, those are a few pictures of Cana, of Galilee.
I'm sorry, where's Cana again?
Cana it's west of the Sea of Galilee, over here. If you look at map, because it's not on map 108. You got to go to map 107. You see Cana, and Cana is just about how many miles would that be? That would just be like maybe 5-6 miles north of Nazareth, where Jesus was raised. You see Nazareth almost directly south. And by the way, look at this map 107 is interesting because it also tells you something of the fruitfulness of that part of that region. Because here you see that there's grapes, there's an abundance of grapes, there's olive, and olives, and there's vineyards, and there's dates, and there's figs, and this whole region. So it's very beautiful, very fertile, very fruitful. There's, it's in the mountainous area, so there's rain. There's enough rain to provide for fruitfulness of the land. Okay, so he goes to Cana. Now let's keep moving. Let's keep following Jesus. And then in John chapter 2, after he does the miracle of turning the water into wine, where does he go? John 2, verse 12. Okay, first he goes to Capernaum. So now here's his first, from what we know anyway, the first stop of Jesus in Capernaum. This will become the hometown of Jesus, but not yet. But he goes to Capernaum, he and his mother, his brethren, and they continued there not many days, it says. So from Cana, they went to Capernaum. We really don't know why, but he went. So look at the map again. If you look at the map from Cana to Capernaum, it's about, again, another 16 or so miles. 16 or so miles. Now, on page 222 in your book, let's see here, 222. Notice this. This is very interesting. And I found this also. If you look on page 222, look at the first column there. And Jen, could you read the first paragraph on page 222 that begins early Christians identified? He's talking about the city of Capernaum here, okay?
Early Christians identified one of these houses as the house of Simon Peter, and they converted it to a house church. An octagonal church was built over the house church as a memorial to the great apostle about AD 450. A white limestone synagogue dated by the excavators to about AD 400 stood a few yards west of the church. Underneath the synagogue, excavations revealed basalt foundations, possibly part of the synagogue in which Jesus preached.
Okay, so what he's saying here, and if you just notice up here, I do have a few pictures now of Capernaum. So here's an overview of the ruins of Capernaum. This is an aerial view. Now, somewhere was the home of Simon Peter. Remember when Jesus healed Simon Peter's mother-in-law? And then where Jesus made Capernaum his home base. Somewhere in here, in this town, this ancient city, lived Jesus during his earthly ministry with Simon Peter. Now, there was a place identified, and here's a closer picture of some of the ruins. And then this is again, so if you actually look, you see this structure here?
Mhm.
See, this is kind of probably like maybe a museum that's there. So if you notice this, you could see it in the background. So these are just closer views of what you see from the aerial picture. But this is this how do you say that? Octagonal church. They believed, according to what the book says, and what archaeologists have also found, that this was the home of Simon Peter, where Jesus Christ himself lived. It was on the site. So because that site was identified as that place, they built a church over that as a memorial. So that's why we see that. So it wasn't an octagonal structure when Jesus was alive. That's what they built later on, but that's what exists now. But that could be the site where Jesus Christ himself lived in Capernaum. Whoa! That's not good. It's ancient, my ancient Bible. Okay. It's as ancient as that ruin, I think. Okay. So now he's in Capernaum, and now after Capernaum, where does he go? You were on that one before. He goes to Jerusalem. So here's his first visit to Jerusalem. Now, depending on whether he went through Samaria or went around and avoided Samaria. If you went through Samaria, they say it would be a 3-day journey. If you went around, it would become a 5-day journey. So we're talking about Bible geography. So that's why I'm mentioning that. It's about 100 miles. Now, it only says the one time, or no, it actually says other times. Jesus definitely went through Samaria numbers of occasions. But here it doesn't say whether he did or whether he didn't. What do you think? If it doesn't say he went through Samaria, does that kind of indicate that he went around it, do you think? I don't know. I'm just asking.
I think so, because that would be the norm.
That would be the norm. Yeah, I kind of feel that, but I'm not sure. Yeah. So anyway, when we're reading in the text here, it says he went up to Jerusalem. That's could be anywhere from a 3 to 5 day journey, about 100 miles. So now we see this on, let's see here. Is this on any, particular map?
Map 110 has Jerusalem on it.
Yeah, that would probably be true. Map 110 would probably be the best map here because it shows where Jesus was in Capernaum. And since he was right at the Jordan River area, he could have gone around, the east side of the Sea of Galilee and then just down there and then down to Jerusalem that way. That probably would even make sense from Capernaum to do that. So he goes to Jerusalem and he ministers there in Jerusalem. That's where he has, his meeting with Nicodemus, and he does other things and he preaches, and he even he baptizes there. And of course, cleanses the temple and so forth. So he goes to Jerusalem, cleanses the temple, meets Nicodemus, ministers. If you look in John 3, verse 22, that's an interesting verse because he tarried there in Judea and did ministry there in Judea. John 3:22. Mondello, can you please read that for us, please?
After this, Jesus and his disciples went out into the Judean countryside, where he spent some time with them and baptized.
Okay, so we don't know how much time, but there he ministered, he baptized, and therefore more disciples were coming to him. John was not yet thrown into the prison. So this is an amazing time of ministry on planet Earth. It's a very short time that both Jesus and John were serving God at the same time in a similar, almost in the same country. That's amazing. You think about it, isn't it? It's amazing. It was a very short time because John would be quickly thrown into prison. Okay, so then Jesus ministered there in Judea, and then of course we see his movement in John chapter 4 and verse 4. And what does it say there? Frida, could you read John 4 and verse 4? Wherever, you know what? If you could please read verse 3 and 4, please.
He left Judea and departed again into Galilee, and he must needs go through Samaria.
Okay, so clearly he was in Judea, and he goes through Samaria, and that's where he had, of course, his meeting with the woman at the well, and then stayed as well in that area and that region. So he came to Jacob's well. I don't know if this was the well that Jesus, I don't think so. But this is probably the same location where Jacob's well was. And you could visit it today. Has anybody gone to Samaria? But this is the area where Jesus went to Sychar. And of course, this area is between the two mountains, Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, which go back even to the book of Joshua. Remember where they read the blessings on one mountain and the cursings on the other. And this is where Jesus Christ was in Samaria and Sychar. So if you could find that on the map, page 110, and you'll see and you can even see Sychar, and it says Jesus addresses a Samaritan woman at Jacob's well right there. So Jesus was looking at these mountains. So letter F, are you guys with me? Is this okay?
Yeah.
Just so sorry. Okay, so Jesus returns to Galilee through Samaria. So this is another 3-day journey. He spent a lot of time on the road. Spent a lot of time. And it never says he had a horse or a donkey, except when he rode into Jerusalem. And he got that donkey. Remember, he borrowed it.
Yeah.
It wasn't his. So it leads me to think that he was not being transported around by donkeys, but he was walking. Huh?
The original hiker.
Oh, yeah. Yes. Okay, so then he goes back into, if you go to the end of John chapter 4 and verse 43 now, John 4, verse 43. Scott, could you read that verse for us, please?
And after 2 days he departed thence and went And went into Galilee.
Okay, so again, we can follow his steps, follow his footsteps. So he goes back into the Galilean region, and there, in returning to Galilee, he ministers to the nobleman's son, and he heals the nobleman's son there, and that's in John chapter 4. He came into Cana, verse 46, specifically, where he had done his first miracle, and he went back to Cana of Galilee to heal the nobleman's son. That's the bottom of page 15. Okay? So that's his first year of ministry.
So what
That's
is
his year of inauguration. Yes, Ellie?
G, what his early miracles? Is that what it is? Okay.
I'm sorry, where now? What?
Letter G at the
Oh,
bottom.
no, his early Galilean ministry. I'm sorry. No, this would be his, I'm sorry, yeah. This would be his early Galilean ministry. Thank you. That's letter G. His early Galilean ministry. He goes back into Galilee. And so now just think about it. He's now baptized a number of people. He has definite followers, and now they're with him somewhat, training them. And that's the end of his first year. And again, Matthew and Mark and Luke tell us very little of that first year of ministry. It's like they go right from his baptism, his temptation, and then just say he went into Galilee, but then we don't read about any of those other meetings, do we? With Nicodemus, the woman at the well, his ministry in Samaria, and so forth. Even his cleansing of the temple the first time. Isn't that interesting? That like Matthew and Mark tell us he cleansed the temple just before he died, but it doesn't say he cleansed it at the beginning of his ministry. But he did cleanse the temple twice, once at the beginning, once at the end. Okay, so let's just kind of jump ahead now. Go to his second year for the last few moments we have tonight, page 16 in your notes. His second year of ministry is highlighted as Jesus centers his ministry now in Capernaum. So we'll see that. So his ministry is focuses in on Capernaum and spreads out from there. And then in the second year, we see the calling of the 12 apostles. And we see his ministry throughout Galilee. Now, in his second year and then in his third year, there are 3 separate tours of Galilee. Did you know that? Did you know Jesus Christ makes 3 tours around Galilee? So we're gonna look at that. In his second year, he makes 2 of them. Now we're gonna say, and again, it's kind of difficult to say exactly when his second year begins, but for sake of argument, okay, we're gonna say his second year begins with here's the second bullet point there, his rejection in Nazareth. When he's rejected in Nazareth, he removes himself to Capernaum. So his second year will begin with his rejection in Nazareth, his removal to Capernaum. As I've mentioned, the synoptic gospels say very little of Jesus' first year of ministry, but focus on his second and third year. So look at Matthew chapter 4. Matthew chapter 4. And Melissa, could you read that verse, please? Verse number 13, Matthew chapter 4, verse 13.
And leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum, which is upon the sea coast in the borders of Zebulun and Naphtali.
Okay. So here it doesn't say why he left Nazareth, but it tells us now in Luke chapter 4, if you go to Luke chapter 4, why he left Nazareth. He went there, he presented himself as the Messiah. Jesus was well known to these people. He grew up with them. And as he said a number of times, a prophet has no honor where? In his hometown. People know him too well. They think there's nothing special about him. So in Luke chapter 4 and verse number 28, when Jesus Christ gave the message, we won't go into all the details, but in verse 28, Jenny, could you read, please, verse 28 and 29?
And all they in the synagogue, when they heard these things, were filled with wrath, and rose up and thrust him out of the city, and led him unto the brow of the hill whereon their city was built, that they might cast him down headlong.
And verse 30 to 31 as well, please.
But he, passing through the midst of them, went his way, and came down to Capernaum, a city of Galilee, and taught them on the Sabbath days.
Okay, now I love this passage because he was pushed out of the city. And when I was studying the city, and when I began my study of the city years ago, this passage really was burned in my heart, how Christ has been pushed out of many places, many countries, many cities, pushed out. And this passage is amazing because he permits them to push him out. But then there comes a point where you can push him only so far, and then he will go his way. So people can exercise their will against Christ, but not beyond the sovereign plan of God. It's really amazing because they pushed him, it says, to the brow of a hill. They were going to cast him down. They were going to kill him. Now, you locate this place. Now, why is my clicker not working here? So Jesus was in Nazareth here. And here's first century Nazareth. Could be like a home that Jesus himself was raised in, flat roof, something like that. And then he went to the synagogue that day, and then they brought him to the brow of a hill to throw him down. This is called Mount Precipice in Nazareth. This could be the very spot that they brought Jesus to cast him down. Now think of this. The city has risen up against him. They have pushed him. They have pushed him. It seems they have total control over him. But then all of a sudden, their control ceases and Jesus Christ shows his omnipotence. And it says he walked right through the midst of them and they could do nothing. It's quite a thought to think of how their anger was just, I don't know, their arms just became weak and he just walked through. It says there in that scripture, he passed through the midst of them and went his way, even though they had intention to cast him down and kill him. So this is Mount Precipice. So from here, Jesus goes where? He's in Nazareth. He's cast out of Nazareth. And where does he go to? To Capernaum. So now, the last bullet point there is Galilee supported a population. This is actually the introduction here of his year of popularity. Supported a population of about 150 to 300,000 souls. Josephus mentions 204. That's the blank. 204 villages scattered about the hills and valleys of the region. So he goes to Nazareth. He faces this violent rejection. And then he moves to Capernaum. That's about a 20-mile journey. He moves to Capernaum, which becomes the center of his Galilean ministry. And we'll stop here, but I want to show you this just before we go. This also is Mount Precipice in Nazareth. This is what Jesus could have been looking at as they were about to cast him down off of that cliff. But then as he went his way, halfway between Nazareth and Capernaum, and he's walking. No, look at where he would be walking. He would be walking up alongside the Sea of Galilee. And this is right at that region. So this is not Mount Precipice. This is not Nazareth. But this would be a sight that Jesus could have seen after his rejection in Nazareth. And if I had gone through such a traumatic moment and see such beauty on top of this hill, and with the Sea of Galilee behind me, this is perhaps what he saw as he was being rejected by man. And perhaps there he just praised God for his life and for his ministry before him. And now he's going to move his ministry to Capernaum, and he's going to say, I still am going to preach the kingdom of God to other cities also, for therefore am I sent. So we'll stop right there and we'll pick up. And next week, we'll talk about the year of popularity following the footsteps of Jesus in the gospel accounts. You made it.